Hi, everybody. We'll give it another minute or two for people to sign on. While we are waiting, I'm guessing most of you saw my email I just sent. My husband is positive for COVID. The only known exposure we have is through our daughter. So I'm guessing I will find out she is also positive today. I'm going to go get another COVID test, or as I say, brain touch, after I teach at 10 today. So around 11. I'm just going to assume I'm positive, but even if I'm not, we've been advised by multiple medical professionals to quarantine for 10 days. So my husband's doctor, my doctor, and my daughter's doctor. So we will be doing stuff this way for the foreseeable future. At least next week. Hopefully after that, we'll all get negative tests and I'll be able to return the following week to campus, because again, I know this is not ideal. So again, thank you all for being flexible. I'm sure you're not super sad. I'm not exposing you right now, potentially. Just a couple things logistically, and in case people sign on late, I'll try to bring this back up at the end as well. So yes, your exam on Monday will now have to be on Blackboard. So if you haven't done exams on Blackboard yet, let me tell you a little bit of how that'll work. I will put all the questions I was going to have on a printed out test for you on Blackboard. And then you will just type your answers in there. I think I should be able to just plug the questions even with pictures into Blackboard. If I can't for some reason, I'll just make it a Word doc that you'll download, fill out, and then resubmit. What I do when I give tests remotely is I do ask that you sign into Blackboard while you take it, or sorry, sign into Zoom while you take it. And that is for the reason that I want to be available to you for questions, just like I would be were we able to do it in class. So please on Monday, sign into Zoom as if we were meeting for a lecture class. And then I will have the exam all ready to go and y'all will be able to fill it out.
After the exam, are we doing class like normal or can we sign off?
After exam, you'll sign off. I'm anticipating the exam will probably take you the whole 50 minutes. So I'll get the chat up here and I can tell you what the format is. I've decided that instead of having you write out definitions, I'm going to do matching for definitions. And will be 5 of those worth 2 points each. Okay, and then the rest of the exam is 7 scenarios that you react to. And each of those has multiple questions underneath, and those add up to 90 points. There, and then that's 10 points for the matching, which gets you to the 100 points. There will also be some extra credit, fill in the blank questions. I think those are going to be worth 3 points. So in theory, you got everything right. You could get a 103. In theory, you bomb a couple things, you can still get a really, really good score with the extra credit. So
question of the scenarios we'll be reacting to, are those like multiple choice, a combination of multiple choice, essay kind of stuff?
So they're short answer. So let me I'll sort of hold these up but not show you the scenarios. So like it would be something, oh god, I need to take off the blur, hang on, sorry. That's not gonna work. There we go. Now you'll be able to see it. So like, questions like that. And I'm expecting just a sentence, if that, for each one. And each of those is worth 3 points. So they're all short answer. But I'm not anticipating any of the answers taking you a long time to answer, if that makes sense. And so scenarios, actually, let me screen share our review sheet because I think that will help. So let me just pull it up real quick here. There we go. Okay. So let me go ahead and make this bigger so y'all can see it a little better. All right, so the top part is a little different. This will now be those matching. So it'll be 5 matching. And then 30 short answer questions, each worth 3 points. And again, very, very, very short. And then these are possible terms for those matching. Studying these terms will also help you with the scenarios as well. So, here are scenarios that you might run into. So, looking at a news article, quote unquote, right, for a scientific finding, and kind of critiquing whether it seems to be accurate or not. The credentials of a scientist or author. So how Stephen Leiss pointed out to us on our library day, how you can see, oh, this author is from, Yale or whatever. The questions that were in our last PowerPoint to ask about scientific literacy, right? So like, is there another agenda for this? Things along those lines. The things on social media that we looked at before. So identifying fake versus real social media profiles, or you see something on Instagram and how do you know how to judge it? The hierarchy of scientific evidence of a source that we talked about on Wednesday. So thinking about that pyramid. So meta-analysis is at the top, case reports at the bottom, right? And you don't have to know the exact location of everything, but just being able to say, oh, this is a randomized control trial that would be better than if it was just, one single case study. So I mentioned the fake versus real social media profiles and the trolling activity you did as well. So it's going to be really similar to what we've been doing in class, essentially. So again, studying these terms will help you to for the short answer. And then going back, and there are links to it in the PowerPoints and on Blackboard. I'm going to stop sharing here. Will give you indications of a good practice, right, of doing like the spot the social media tool, stuff like that. Debbie, I love that you had to explain what a troll is. Yeah, we have our own language, right? In this new digital age, we all have to know what these terms mean, right? Like I was thinking about how the term blog, right, didn't exist until probably the 90s. When people started keeping live journals. And now we have vlogs as well, right? All this like evolving language. Yeah, live journal dates us, right? If you know what that is. So yeah, basically, I'm mostly going to be asking you to apply the information we've been talking about in class in the same way as we've been applying it in class. Yeah, I learned HTML to send fancy emails for the student organizations I was involved in with like pictures and whatnot, flashing things. All right, questions about the exam or how you should study for it? You're gonna hear my daughter in the background. She's singing. All right, oh, go ahead, Hannah. I think you might have just been signing on, so sorry. So please, as you prepare for the exam over the weekend, don't hesitate to email me. I'm going to try to be super available, more so than I have been in terms of emails, just because that's the only way you can really communicate with me now. And yeah, I'm anticipating that this will actually hopefully be a little fun. I made some of the examples for y'all humorous, so hopefully it won't be a painful test. But also, full disclosure, this is my first time writing a test for this class. So it could be you get through this in 20 minutes, or it could be maybe the 50 minutes isn't quite long enough. So if it gets to the case where like no one's finished, I will probably say, okay, just stop and I'll like grade out of whatever. But I think, like I said, with these short answers, oh, and you're just coming to say hi, you should be able to do this without a problem in 50 minutes. You want to? You're gonna purr? Alrighty. Well, I'm gonna dive back in. Oh, look, Simba. There's another. He could care less. He's like, oh no, you're picking me up. I did not consent to this. I want my cat's autonomy.
Sheldon's like, no.
This is the benefit of Zoom, right? We can see each other's pets. So, let me go ahead and Simba so I can share my screen, and we'll get back into our lecture here. Yes, thank you. Hi. So we had just watched the video on Bill Nye the other day. Go ahead and get our captions going. Again, actually went and did a lot more reading, talked to the scientists who were working on things, and figured out maybe it's wrong to judge GMOs harshly, right? And so again, some people would say, oh, you flip-flopped or something like that. He would say, no, I just became more informed, and so I changed my response. Hey, how about you not stand on my keyboard? Thank you. One bud, good boy. And so that is a big part of scientific literacy that's hard for people who are not scientifically literate to understand, right? Because I think partially because America, at least in part, was founded as a religious country, right? If we think about the Pilgrims, then it's hard for us to think that changing your beliefs or changing your faith in an idea is not in some way, being disloyal or something like that, right? But it actually is a really good thing to be able to change your opinion. It allows you to grow as a person, right? And it allows you to, just gain more knowledge, right? And so this is another thing that we talk about, right? Is that people will, and this seems to be the currency of the internet, right? I think about the Nicki Minaj tweet this week, right? That like someone, her cousin knows, like after they got the vaccine, their testicles swollen. And yeah, like Trinidad and Tobago apparently like spent a lot of time trying to track down this mystery person who doesn't exist. And like I told my husband the story, and he was like, that guy just has an STD. Like it's not the COVID vaccine. And I was like, that makes sense, because part of her story was that the wedding that she was supposed to go to, the couple broke up, and it's like, yeah, they would break up if one of them had an STD, probably, right? That they didn't get from the other person. So definitely, take everything with a grain of salt, right? And personal experience is based on things we've personally seen or done. And it's limited not only to like what we've actually experienced, but also our interpretation of what we've experienced, right? So, I have never been into horoscopes other than to like find them amusing. But there are some people who really buy into them, right? So if I have a really crummy day, like I'm having today, right, I just say, well, this is what happens when a parent who tests positive for COVID-19 still sends their child to school in my daughter's class, which is how this happened. But someone who's really into astronomy might say, this is because the stars were aligned and Mercury is in retrograde, right? And so personal experience could obviously be tainted by what you know or believe. And this is like not to totally make fun of anyone who likes their horoscope, but please take it with a grain of salt. So one of the problems with personal experience is that humans are not always accurate or reliable at what they see. So one of the things that your book talks about is change blindness. And this is one of my favorite videos about that. So I'm just going to show it to you and they explain everything. And again, this sort of shows that we shouldn't necessarily trust what we know, right? What we've seen with our own eyes.
You are about to take part in a quick experiment. Take a look at this. Okay, now, did you happen to notice anything odd? Watch again. See any changes? Don't worry if you didn't see that it's two different men. It means your brain is doing exactly what it should be. It's focusing on the meaning of the scene rather than on the irrelevant details. Imagine how much energy and brain mass it would take for us to remember every single person, place, or thing we encountered. The things that matter, a conversation with a coworker, your child's first step, would be drowned by a deluge of information. So when there are minor changes to the world around us, we often don't pick up on them. There are two similar phenomena at work.
Inattentional blindness is the failure to notice something that's fully obvious right there in front of you when your attention is engaged on something or someone else. Change blindness is a failure to notice a difference between what's there right now and what was there a moment ago.
Scientists such as Daniel Simons from the University of Illinois have spent years devising experiments testing just how perceptive and unperceptive humans actually are.
So we feel like we're aware of everything, that we're taking in all of the details, and that if something important happens, we'll automatically notice it. It'll capture our attention. The reality is that we often don't notice unexpected things because we're aware of far less of our world than we think we are.
So how much or how little are we actually aware of? We decided to recreate one of Simon's most famous experiments to see for ourselves. Here's the setup.
Our senior series producer, Vin, poses as a lost pedestrian and asks a passerby for directions.
Excuse me, I'm looking for the skyline.
Then, we break the two up, walking through them holding a large sheet of wood. Now watch as I replace Vin. You might think people would notice the switch, but almost half the time, they didn't. Of course, that means more than half the time they did. We only tried the experiment 9 times, and by no means was it good science. But we were surprised 4 people didn't notice the switch. In Simon's original experiment, 7 out of 15 people didn't either. So what determines whether or not you can figure out the switch?
When you look at another person, you encode what's relevant for what you're doing right then, in that case, giving directions, and you don't pay attention to the details that are irrelevant, say what color their shirt is or exactly how tall they are. As long as you are able to make sense of the meaning of the scene and roughly the main categories of that person, say their height, their age, what race they are, what sex they are, as long as those important things don't change, the meaning of the scene really hasn't changed and you're not going to notice that anything's different.
Scientists have documented inattentional and change blindness since the 1970s.
So I'll stop there. I've seen a like fancier version of this where at one point they actually, the wood they walk through with has a picture of like the main guy on it, which is funny. But yeah, so this happens, right? Where we have what's called change blindness, where we might not notice something that changes right in front of our eyes. Right? And this is sort of a silly example that's not necessarily applicable to real life, right? But you can imagine how this might come to play with someone manipulating data they're presenting to us, right? Or, things that change within our government. So we can't always trust what we see.
You are about to take part in a quick
Okay. The other thing this got me thinking about was flashbulb memories, just because I think I told you that last week I went to Dr. Minnis's class and they were talking about flashbulb memories and other memories. So give you a quick overview. Flashbulb memories are memories that are seared into our brain when there's a traumatic event. So I have a flashbulb memory for 9/11. I was a sophomore in college. I remember coming out of the hall bathroom, going into my room. This is when AOL was a thing, instant messenger. And a friend of mine had messaged me, plane hits the Twin Towers. And I remember thinking, what a horrible accident. Because you never want to think something like that's intentional, right? And then, things following throughout that day, finding out it wasn't, right? But that's seared into my mind, that moment that I found out. But, and we've always, people always think this is accurate, but recent research actually shows that even these seared in memories are not necessarily as indelible as we thought. So
Okay, pop quiz. What did you have for lunch yesterday? What about the day before? How about last Tuesday? You might remember yesterday, but you probably don't remember last week. And even if you have a guess, you might have some nagging doubts that it was something else. Now think of the most vivid memory you have. Maybe it was when one of your grandparents passed away, or when you graduated from high school, or your first breakup. You probably remember all sorts of details from what happened, like where you were, who you were with, and even the exact words someone said or the clothes you were wearing. Psychologists call these super detailed memories flashbulb memories. They get seared into your brain, and you're sure you remember everything about your experience, even years afterward, as if it were yesterday. But even your most vivid memories might not be as reliable as you think they are. I'm Britt Garner, and this is SciShow Psych. The term flashbulb memory was coined by psychologists Robert Brown and James Kulik in 1977 to describe the vivid memories people have after emotionally intense events. Many of the people Brown and Kulik talked to said the events that caused these memories were upsetting events in the news, like the assassinations of President Kennedy or Martin Luther King Jr. We don't know exactly how flashbulb memories form, but based on fMRI brain scans, scientists think two main parts of the brain are involved: the hippocampus, which helps form new memories, and the amygdala, which processes emotions. These memories can be difficult to study because the best way to do a good experiment is after an unexpected major news event, and researchers can't really plan for that in advance. Despite that, we've learned a fair amount over the years. We know, for example, that people create flashbulb memories around traumatic events, but they don't always have to be negative experiences. In 2007, researchers found that both East and West Germans formed flashbulb memories around the fall of the Berlin Wall, regardless of whether they thought it was a good or a bad thing. We also know that even though these memories are super vivid, they're not necessarily accurate. That's probably because people tend to think and talk about vivid memories a lot. Psychologists call this rehearsing a memory, and flashbulb memories can get rehearsed many, many times. But the rehearsal process isn't perfect. Your brain will often try to fill gaps in your memory with things that might feel like they're true, but really aren't. So if you're rehearsing a flashbulb memory and something fits the pattern of the event you're thinking about, your brain can make it part of the memory without you even realizing. Studies done on flashbulb memories after 9/11 helped confirm this. Researchers realized that the horrible tragedy probably generated flashbulb memories in a lot of people, so they started doing studies. For example, one group at Duke University quickly gathered 54 volunteers and asked them to describe their experiences on that day. The participants were also asked to describe another, more ordinary event that had happened a couple days before. Then, the researchers brought the participants back either 1, 6, or 32 weeks later and asked them to recall both memories. Their descriptions of the ordinary events got less accurate over time, which wasn't surprising. When asked, the volunteers all said that the much more vivid 9/11 memory would be more consistent. But here's the thing. The subjects' memories of what they did on 9/11 were just as inconsistent as the ordinary memories from the same time. People felt like they remembered vivid details from 9/11, but those details were different from what they told to the researchers right after it happened. In fact, 42% of the inconsistencies in both kinds of memories came from the distinctive details the subjects thought were true. In another, larger study, 2,000 people were surveyed about their memories of finding out about the terrorist attacks on 9/11. They responded to surveys 1 week, 1 year, 3 years, and 10 years after the attacks, and their memories of the details became less consistent over time. On average, by the time people took the survey 3 years after the attacks, they only remembered 57% of the details accurately, even though they were sure they were remembering right. 10 years after the attacks, the accuracy was about the same, so people's memories got less accurate at first, but then stabilized. So what does this mean for your flashbulb memories? Well, not everything in a flashbulb memory is completely wrong. The basics of what happened are probably accurate, but the vivid details that make it feel so fresh, those are a lot less trustworthy. Even if they feel like they happened yesterday, your flashbulb memories aren't perfect. Thank you for watching this episode.
Okay. So the really interesting thing that I learned while I was preparing to talk to Dr. Minnis's class is that they've done these types of studies and had people hand write out their flashbulb memory. And then they hand them in their own handwriting what they wrote out, weeks, years later. And people will say, I don't know why I wrote that. That's wrong. Like they believe their flashbulb memories so much, they don't believe their own handwriting. And it's so funny because when I was learning about this, my gut instinct was, well, that might be true of other people, but mine's right. And that's not right. And I know that's not right, right? But it's just so held with such conviction that I feel that way.
Okay, pop quiz.
All righty. So the antidote to personal experiences is recognizing that both your experiences and the way you're interpreting them may differ greatly from others, or again, your interpretation can be totally wrong. What we think other people are thinking, for example, right, can be completely wrong. So again, using empathy, or what we sometimes call theory of mind, trying to put ourselves in the other person's shoes. All right, another thing that people will talk about is authority, right? So they'll talk about believing people in authority and positions of authority. And so I think we're all familiar with this. Former President Trump said that we should inject disinfectants into us to get rid of COVID because it works on surfaces. Right, not great. I like this video because you see one of his science consultants just reacting to him saying these things. So this one's shorter. I'll go ahead and share.
Supposing we hit the body with a tremendous, whether it's ultraviolet or just very powerful light, and I think you said that hasn't been checked, but you're going to test it. And then I said, supposing you brought the light inside the body, which you can do either through the skin or in some other way. And I think you said you're going to test that too. Sounds interesting. Right, and then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number in the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that. So that you're going to have to use medical doctors with. But it sounds interesting to me. So we'll see, but the whole concept of the light, the way it kills it in 1 minute, that's pretty powerful. Steve, please.
Hey, NBC News.
To see the cringe on her face. That's why I love that version. She's the actual expert, right? And she can't just stand up and yell at the president of the United States as much as she probably wants to. There's a famous picture of at some point during the pandemic, Trump saying something that's not accurate and Fauci just face palming behind him, like he just couldn't stop himself. So yeah, sometimes the people we think we should trust who are in authority, sometimes the highest authority in the land, say things that are inaccurate. And, I'm sort of poking fun at Trump here because we know that he said a lot of falsehoods, but this is true of anyone who's in that authority, right? And sometimes they just don't know they're saying things that are incorrect, right? I think about the weapons of mass destruction thing. And sometimes it is what, in 1984, they called doublespeak, and they're purposely trying to sort of misdirect us.
Supposing.
The other thing that your book talks about, which I really like, is the idea of okay, so we do have authorities who are scientists, but the way that they're portrayed oftentimes in popular culture is not accurate at all. Yeah, her face was great. Well, I just love that. So when you think about scientists in movies like Independence Day or other disaster movies, right? The same scientist can do something medical to you and do a calculation, to do something with physics and whatnot. And in fact, when you get a PhD, it doesn't mean you know all the science. In fact, what it typically means is you know this much of the science because you're so specialized in, right? So like my PhD in clinical psychology does mean I know in general an overview about adult psychopathology because that was my area of specialty, but it certainly does not mean that I know everything about that. And in fact, my dissertation was about social comparison in college women and how that relates to body dissatisfaction, right? So that's really narrow. So again, another video kind of pointing out some of these inaccuracies in how scientists are portrayed.
This video is sponsored by the Great Courses Plus, but more on that later. All right, Johnston, I'm gonna need you to crunch those numbers and try to make some sense out of this mess. What numbers, sir? Yeah, if you could just crunch those numbers and let me know. You just walked over here and without any context said crunch the numbers. A conversation with someone else about these numbers, other people won't just immediately know about them. You know that, right? Listen, I'm not the scientist here. Just crunch the damn numbers. Excuse me, sir. Sorry, I was just listening in. I assume you're talking about the Flibaducci numbers? That's not a real... Well, I crunched them. And? The plan is risky. Run them again, but different. Okay, great. I know exactly what that means. God, I hate you, Kevin. So I guess going back in time before the events took place is out of question? Yeah, no shit. Maybe not. Here we go. What if instead of going backwards in time, we went through it sideways? Jesus Christ, is that even possible? No, that doesn't even mean anything. I can't say for sure, but it is guaranteed to work. What we need is interdimensional travel. Kevin, all your years as a neuroscientist must have taught you something about that, right? Why would you possibly think he knows about that? Yeah, of course it has. So what do you think? Well, I'm well versed in the math. Again, why? But in practice, we need an imaginary matter accelerator. With the stuff we have lying around, I could probably build one. You could probably build... Fuck you, Kevin. Look, I'm sorry, but we have to discontinue funding for your research. What? Why? Shouldn't be that surprising. You just objectively haven't contributed to science. You haven't published anything. This is my life. You can't do this. No, we're doing this. I can't believe you're doing this. Hey, I'm with the other people that you didn't know about till now. Do you want some of our money? Okay. No, I'm like really smart. That just hasn't been established in the movie yet. Man, this problem's unsolvable. Showtime. I've been at it for hours. There's just no solution. That's where you're wrong. Kevin, you crazy son of a bitch. You actually did it. We are 4 billion light years from Earth. We're never going to see our families again. I have an idea. Are you familiar with the concept of a wormhole? Yeah, of course, but where are we going to find a sheet of paper with 2 holes in it at a time like this? We usually think that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, but a wormhole folds, and then you can go straight through it. That's so helpful. And you know how to build one? I just understand the concepts. Oh, in other words, you don't understand it. I do. Damn it, Kevin. Huge thanks to the Great Courses Plus for sponsoring this video.
So accurate in terms of how movies portray scientists, right? So yeah, we have these ideas that are implanted by pop culture of what scientists should be able to do. And then we get sort of mind boggled when someone can't do that, right? And then the funny thing to me is when we are doing amazing things, like developing a vaccine for COVID-19 in less than a year, people are like, whoa now, right? But
this video is
thing, and it was done because they were given the proper amount of funding. Anecdotes, I would say, to me, in my opinion, right now, are the most dangerous thing to scientific literacy in general, maybe society as a whole, in general, right? So again, the funny thing is I made this PowerPoint last week before the Nicki Minaj tweet came out, right? And it's not that far off from my brother's wife's cousin says, this guy on Facebook injected and so this is a great website called What's the Harm? And it kind of looks at some of these common things, and some of these we've talked about already. But let me give you an example of detox, right? So a lot of people talk about detoxing their body. Spoiler alert, you don't need to do that. Unless, you know, something horrible is going on with your vital organs and you need to do something, you know, like dialysis. Like, your body does that for you. So you're good. And so, you know, actually your body is really good. You can read more about it, you know, harming people by not thinking critically. So this person saw a neuropath, not a real doctor, for a kidney condition. He was put on detoxification and lost 11 kilograms in 10 days. She was advised to drink more and more water, up to 5 liters a day. She had seizures, but it feels the effects later. People don't know that it's like dose makes the poison, right? So even things we consume normally, like water, right? And we're made up of water. If you consume too much of it, it can be deadly, right? And so when people are like, oh, there's formaldehyde in vaccines, it's like, yeah, to preserve it, and it's not going to harm you, right? They do all the tests to make sure on them. So this is a really great website to look at a lot of these sort of hot button issues, to look at some of these things, you know, conspiracy theories, moon landing denial, things along those lines. So again, we're always dealing with uncertainty. You know, we can't just trust one story, particularly by someone we don't know online, right? All right, so how does the scientific approach differ, right? So this is a lot of what we do, and type 1 and type 2 error are a couple of the terms on your review sheet. So when we do science, which we'll talk more about your exam after your exam starting next Wednesday, we are doing experiments, right? We are testing a hypothesis. Oh yeah, Debbie, sorry, I didn't see your comment. Wrinkle in Time reference, yeah. So, and the idea is we can have 4 outcomes, right, based on that. So we test the hypothesis using some statistical analyses, right, and actually crunching numbers that exist, not just the numbers, like the video we just watched. And so based on what those numbers tell us, we can accept the null hypothesis, which is that essentially there's no relationship between these variables, or we can reject that. And then there are 2 scenarios in terms of the true state of nature. So in my assessment class right now, we've been talking about true scores versus observed scores, right? So sometimes what actually exists, we don't necessarily see from our numbers because of some sort of error that maybe we introduced or our participants introduced, or, you know, something weird happened in the lab, right? Good example, if you read the book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, highly recommend, excellent book. Shows the bias in science, how this poor African-American woman was just, I mean, her body is a thing now. But for years, they thought that they were like finding genes that kind of acted in the way that hers did, the HeLa gene. And in fact, what they eventually discovered is that the HeLa cells are just like almost like a virus. It's like they'll just get into anything. They'll get into your filtration system. And so even if you didn't intentionally put them in other cells you're looking at, they'll be there if they're in your lab, right? And so there's an example where you might reject the null hypothesis, but in fact, that's not actually accurate. So that's called type 1 error. This is where you reject a true null hypothesis. So you say, yeah, there's a relationship when there's not. So then you can also reject the null, say there is a relationship between these variables, when that's true, when the null hypothesis is false, right? That's another correct conclusion. So, hey, 50% of the time, just statistically, you should come up with a correct conclusion, right? But that also means 50% of the time, if there's a lot of error, you could come up with an incorrect conclusion, right? And so if you say there is no relationship when there actually is, that is type 2 error. So this is where you're saying, no, these variables aren't related, when in fact they are. And so you're missing what could potentially be a really important finding, again, because of some error that was introduced. This is another sort of funny example, right? So, you know, type 1 error is telling an old guy, you know, who clearly doesn't have a uterus, you're a doctor, you've checked that, you're pregnant, right? Something that's clearly not true. And then here you're telling a woman that, again, you've examined and this is not a tumor, right? This is a fetus. You're not pregnant, right? And so type 1 error can also be called a false positive, and type 2 error can also be called a false negative. So it's really important to keep those in mind. You know, and we try to do everything we can to rule out as much error as possible. But, you know, life is messy, and particularly in psychology, when we start to look at humans, that's super messy. So we've already mentioned Andrew Wakefield's research. I think I might have mentioned Brian Wansink as well, how a lot of his stuff had to be retracted because he messed with the data. So some nice links for you to look at some of those cases. So, and then your article that you read on Perusal for this section was about bias. So I just wanted to kind of review this for you all. So how often does psychology publish research that highlights race? Only 5% of the publications. It's highest in developmental psych. I thought it was interesting that it wasn't something like social psych, where we also often look at these types of questions, and lowest in cognitive psychology. And the reason why not that many people are looking at it is essentially the same reason lay people will say, oh, I don't see color, everyone's the same, right? They're trying to be race neutral, right? And say it's not inherent. But what that ignores is that our abilities can vary as a function of inequality and segregation. Because of these differences in racialized experiences, we may suffer in different ways. We may not have the same cognitive abilities simply because we haven't been afforded the opportunities. Or let's be honest, just having the mental energy to deal with something like racism every day is going to take away from your ability to perform at your highest level. Here you see a lot of white people in editorship positions, right? E I see here as editor-in-chiefs. If there were people who were Black, Indigenous, or people of color, BIPOC, who were an editor-in-chief, they're almost 3 times more likely to publish articles about race. And editorial board members, these are people who basically are a step under the editor-in-chief. They are also super white, right? I'm currently on 3 editorial boards. Super white, right? So we're missing the perspective of other people potentially. And the more white editorial board members they had, the fewer publications came out of that journal that highlighted race. The authors were a little more mixed, which is nice. And we saw that we had even more in cultural specific journals, like the Journal of Cultural Diversity and Ethnic Minority Psychology. That's great, right? But not everyone who is a psychologist of color studies race as their main thing, right? We've got great psychologists of color who are doing a lot of really important things. And for whatever reason, this link isn't working. So let me copy paste this real quick. I think I just needed to, just hit a space after it. So let me go back into the PowerPoint. So does leadership matter? Yes. So during the pandemic, APA had a female president and our CEO is a Black man. And they came out with this statement, as you can see, on May 29th, 2020. So this is very soon after George Floyd's death. And Senator Schulman, who was our president at the time, made these comments and called it a racism pandemic. It's taking a heavy psychological toll on our African-American citizens. The health consequences are dire. I don't know if such a statement would have been made had we not had people who are very representative in our leadership positions for APA. So that's important. This is something I also thought was really important to look at. So how diverse is psychology itself as a field, right? We need to critique ourselves. We need to critique what's happening there. And so you'll see here, I believe, blue is white here. I want to say that blue is female here now. I could be wrong. I know more women go into grad school now. But as you can see, we're very, very, very white still. And we probably need good people of color. So yeah, you can see, and this is you could kind of click around and look at the disability status, for example. Yes, so male is less than female now. Even though you go to conferences and most of the keynote speakers in psychology are still going to be men and are still going to be white. So even though this represents our field, that is not what you see as like the face of our field necessarily. I also thought it was really important to look at graduate students, right? Because this could maybe show what's going to happen next. And this is where some of you are planning to go in a few years. So what you'll see here is the blue bar is white. So we're not, I mean, there was a time where this would have been over 90%, right? So woohoo, we have some progress. But you'll see like, it's still not great, right? And some of these unknowns might just be more white people who didn't report their ethnicity, right? They could be other folks, but other here includes Native American, Native Hawaiian, multi-ethnic, so people who identify as bi or multiracial. We do see we're growing in Hispanic individuals. We are kind of growing depending on the subfield in African American individuals, and then Asian individuals, again, depending on the subfield, have been decently well established. And again, it depends on the subfield. So something like a cognitive or an experimental psychology, which are considered more of sort of the like hard science aspects, might have less representation, right? We see that right here. So I think that that's really important to, again, know about psychology. What are these barriers? What is getting in the way of folks being able to enter, right? And then if you enter, to stay. So I follow many different types of activists on social media. And one of the disability activists I follow just had to drop out of her graduate program because they promised they would do what I'm doing right now and provide closed captions during her lectures, and they refused. So she just was like never going to be able to actually get the information from the lectures in the same way someone without a hearing impairment would be able to do it. So we have a long way to go. Again, even in a field where we are purportedly more sensitive to these things, right? So yeah, I talked a lot more at y'all than usual, but I wanted to make sure that I got through all the information for the exam. So I'll hang around a couple of minutes in case anyone has individual questions. If not, just take care of yourselves. Oh, and one thing I didn't say is because I was double masked Monday, I don't think any of you should actually have exposure from me, but just sort of watch yourself for symptoms just in case. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you Monday for our exam. So again, sign into Zoom on Monday, and then we will go from there. Thank you, Tacey.